Hello and welcome to this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network, and his turn in the rotation, as we like to say. State Rep Chris Hendricks is joining us today. A busy time for you right now.
It is. Hello, Jim, and thank you for having me again.
Late fall. We're in fall right now.
Middle of fall.
A lot of stuff going on, sessions, full house sessions, committee meetings. So there's a lot going on in your district, up on Beacon Hill. Just give us an overview right now as to where you are with sort of, before we get into some of the details, just some of the things you're looking at right now from your standpoint.
So it's been a busy session. The session started in January with elections happening last year. And so since the session started in January, we've done the fiscal budget for 2024. We've done the tax relief bill, which got to the governor's desk, I believe, a month or so ago.
Yep.
And we just, this past week, the House passed their version of the gun modernization bill. After, a year or so of haggling back and forth with the Senate and figuring out the correct process by which this bill was going to go through, we finally decided to do our own version on our own. So we passed that this week, which was a large fraction of the work I've been doing over the last year or so to come to fruition this week. So I could get into details.
We'll get into details. Yeah, I know that's one of the things. So as you're coming late fall, talk to me about scheduling right now. What is the body generally doing right now? Because you're going to come up to the holidays right now. Is there sort of a push to get things done right now?
There's a lot of things pushing to get things done. So I just talked about, we did the gun bill. That was the main priority of the early part of the session, aside from the budget, aside from the tax relief stuff that was on the agenda prior to the session starting. The gun reform was the biggest thing from the House side that they wanted to push through by this fall. There was some issue whether or not we'd be able to do it by this fall, so I'm glad that we were able to get it done. But as you know, we have a lot of issues going on with the sheltering crisis, with the migrants, the child care issue, which you mentioned earlier in our discussions. So there's a lot of pressing matters that have bubbled up this session that looks like we're going to have to be focusing on. Aside from other, legislative priorities.
How much has the economy, inflation and stuff impacted some of the things some of the issues that you folks are dealing with?
Greatly. Offshore wind alone. I mean, you see two of those contracts were deemed null and void based on the last procurement. And so the economy, inflation, supply chain issues, that has been a huge factor for that piece. But coming out of COVID, there's been a lot of strains on a lot of areas of society. Healthcare, wages, the migrant crisis, the sheltering capacity issue. So there's a lot going on that's tied into the state of the economy and the state of where things are at right now.
Amazingly, still the job numbers are fine.
Wages are still
low, but the job market itself.
Job market is
robust.
Thankfully, it's been pretty secure and pretty stable. But the issue there is obviously wages. But we're very that's one thing we don't really have to worry about. On a pressing, that's pressing like other issues that we're dealing with right now.
Let's start local here. Obviously, the biggest issue over the past couple of months has been the Star Store. Obviously, it's in your neck of the woods here, downtown New Bedford. The College of Visual and Performing Arts has left. UMass Dartmouth decided to leave. They're attempting, I guess, to set something up at a location in Dartmouth, which hasn't been set up yet. But your thoughts on it overall? Was the legislature caught off guard by this move?
Not necessarily. As you know, probably better than anybody, that the Star Store issue was a long-term investment over the course of 20 years, literally. And so I think it was just one of those issues that it always needed to be nurtured and had eyeballs on and had our attention. But there was a lot of factors that came into play with the Star Store. You have the UMass administration, which was responsible for doing the upkeep, responsible for doing any type of renovations. From my estimation, I think what the UMass administrators are saying that those costs would have they would have incurred, or a lot less than what they say. That's just my personal opinion. But I think there was, it depended on yearly budgets, budget priorities. It depended on, the UMass administration making sure that they stayed with the upkeep of the building. I think a lot of those things just kind of wasn't as strong as we would have liked, and it all came to a head at the end of that 20-term lease, that 20-year lease. And as you know, there was an extension because of because of COVID, which was in 2021, which would have extended it to, I think, 22. So there was a year extension, which had all the legislative points in place as the 20-year lease. The dollar transfer fee at the end of that 1 year extension was still viable.
Well, there was still legislation too. Part of the legislation was, they were, in a sense, the governor, the legislative delegation said, you must buy this building.
Right.
And it still didn't happen. I mean, I guess the short of it, to me, from the outside, looks like UMass Dartmouth just doesn't want it.
It appears that way. Whether you listen to what they say or not, if you go by their behavior over the last 20 years, behavior meaning how they handled the building, it kind of leaves you to believe that they weren't really interested in keeping and maintaining that building as a UMass Dartmouth asset, which would have been great to know directly from them over these years. But we never really heard. We heard rumblings from some of the tenants in there, from the adult workers education. They always knew that their days were likely numbered in that building, and so they were correct all along through this. I think they were the only ones who were right. And so, but the House, what we in the House did, we put the money in the budget for the building. It was the Senate that didn't get that in. Now I understand that was a way to pressure them to buy the building, and I think that was wise to get them to try to do that. Fortunately, they didn't do it. So that kind of leaves us in a legal limbo with what to do with the building. Now, I'm confident that I could tell you that what you're hearing about the developer, Paul Downey, isn't necessarily true. He, from what I can tell, at all times relevant in this story, he wants to get rid of the building. He wants to put it in the community's hands and have something that's going to bring people downtown, that's going to be the focal point of that area. So this idea that he's a big mean guy and wants to recoup all this money isn't really accurate.
But Paul still owns the building.
Still owns the building, and so from what I hear, it's still trying to be talked about. I've had a few discussions that I don't necessarily want to put on the record now, but I know that there's still discussions being had to keep that building, not necessarily with UMass, but within a city community building. Not necessarily going to go to the city, but I think at the end of the day, when this story is all said and done, that the Star Shore building will be utilized in a way that benefits downtown, bringing economic activity and people to the area.
It does seem, too, that this is a decision, obviously UMass Dartmouth made, but it certainly comes from higher up, because I know that DCAM, the Division of Capital Asset Management, that sort of oversees the buildings for the colleges across the state, they're not really giving out or doing expansions or anything like that right now.
No, yeah, they certainly could have had a bigger part in this, in keeping that building as a UMass Dartmouth asset. And it's a shame that they didn't. Legislation and getting something in place, you can only go so far as a legislator in Mark's position. And I think the people that he relied on to bring this into fruition kind of let him down in a way. And that's DCAM, that's the school administrators. And not to say that these are bad people, but I think there could have been more dialogue between them and the legislature about what their thoughts are on this. And it's a shame that Mark worked pretty hard to get this arrangement set up, this long-term investment, and that at the end we get the building for $1. It's just really unfortunate that didn't take place.
Should these students get reimbursement?
I totally feel that they should get reimbursed. Anybody who was moved, anybody who went to that school thinking that relied on reliance is a big thing in the law,
Yeah.
and they teach you about that in law school. And if you rely on something and you pay money for that and you don't get that, then you're owed some recourse. So I absolutely think there should be.
Because they're not even in where they're supposed to be.
They're not even in where they're supposed to be, and that Bed Bath and Beyond location is just woefully inadequate for the work that they're going to be doing.
And they have nothing. I guess they met with the mayor, and the mayor, according to the mayor's, what I read, they don't have any of the utensils. Is the only word I can think of. They don't have any of the tools that they need to even do the classes right now.
It's not a viable option. I think it's not even a Band-Aid at this point. So I'm hopefully there can be something arranged where whoever maintains control of that building will allow UMass to stay there. It would be under kind of a different arrangement. I don't know at this point what that building is going to end up being used for. But I'm confident that it's not going to be sold and made a humongous profit.
Talk about another issue that sort of got delayed, but is still going on. Commuter rail. Obviously, that sort of starts or ends depending on which train ride you're taking in right in your district's backyard.
Yep.
MBTA announced that it's going to be next summer, 2024, when commuter rail will start.
Next spring, next summer. Yep.
Your thoughts on that? I mean, I don't know
I'm
if
not
there's ever a hard day. Date.
It's obviously unfortunate news. We've been putting a lot of effort, a lot of energy, a lot of capital into this project to get it moved along. Every single briefing that we've had up until a month or so ago has been we're on time, we're on schedule, we're on budget, which is great. Even still, whenever I would talk about it, I would try to tell people, they're saying end of 2023. It's a $4 billion project. If that comes, great by the end of the year, but it's more likely going to be early 2024. That was my vision all along.
Yeah.
Now it turns out that it's going to be April, May, June when the train is up and running.
My understanding, it's the Taunton Junction that still needs. It's like 70% done. They haven't finished that, the 140/24 area.
Yeah, I've heard a number of things. I've heard mostly it's safety testing that's going to be the most time-consuming thing for these, because all the track has been laid from what we can see. The track, the bridges, everything that we need, all the infrastructure is in place. It's just that the safety protocols have to be worked out, and that's going to take some time.
From where you sit, you're not worried. It's going to happen.
It's going to happen. It's unfortunate that there's a delay, but again, some people in the delegation and the South Coast delegation at large were a lot more upset. Not that I'm not upset about it, but I'm not very surprised that it's going to take a few more months than expected. But if you look at that pedestrian bridge every time I drive by it, which is every day, it's like they've done something more significant to it. It's coming along
fast.
very quickly.
Yeah. Another big issue that's affected locally here, and you've been dealing with it, is the migrant housing issue here in the area. The state they've got the shelter-in-place law, right to shelter. The governor came out recently, said, we're going to run out of room and space by the end of October. They're still coming in. It's a national issue that's impacting locally. Your thoughts on what do we do?
Like I mentioned earlier, that's going to be one of the things that's probably going to be on our priority list this session, sooner rather than later. First off, let me just say that the people coming in from out of the country, these migrants, these are people who've already been processed. So they're all legal immigrants. So they're not undocumented in any way. And so the budget...
I thought they were getting some communities, and I'm not saying New Bedford is, but they're getting dropped off, though, right when they come over the border.
From what I'm told, these folks have been processed and are here legally. Would there be exceptions to that? I don't know. But from what we're hearing from the briefings that we had with the House leadership, that all these folks who are coming in, all these families to the Commonwealth have already been processed. So the governor, as you noted, has raised some alarm bells on this, and thankfully so, because it's going to be a huge issue. The fiscal budget for sheltering is around $325 million. That's what we put into the budget, and that, from what we hear from the governor's office, is going to run out in like January, the first month of the fiscal year, or the calendar year. And so that's a problem. And so we're going to need to put more money, inject more money into this issue. We've already put about 250 additional dollars into it. We're told that that's not going to be enough. So I think at some point you're going to be seeing some type of supplemental budget where we're putting more money into this. It's 7,000 plus families, half of which are children. And so it's going to be, we have...
But we don't even have the shelters, or we don't
don't have anything. That's the problem. So that's why we need to act quickly. Because these folks who are in these shelters, they're being moved as fast as they can. And no one wants to move people who are unhoused quicker than they need to be. But unfortunately, that's the plan right now, is to get people into a long-term affordable housing as quickly as possible, and that's been a challenge just because of the sheer numbers of it.
And you've got people, taxpayers, saying, "Why are we footing the bill for this?"
Yeah.
What do you say to them?
Well, listen, this is an issue that is one, it's a federal issue, and two, in many ways, it's kind of out of our hands who comes into the state. That's more of an issue that federal authorities need to be addressing this issue. I've crafted a letter with Senator Mark Pacheco that I signed on to, telling the Biden administration that things need to be done on a federal level regarding immigration. We can't handle it. So it's hard to ask the taxpayers to foot that bill. We don't want to ask the taxpayers to have to foot that bill. But if it's between having people in tents on the streets versus putting a supplemental budget bill out to handle this, I think that we should act by putting more money, as much as we can, that's reasonable, into this issue in helping these 7,000 families get housed and get placed permanently so they're not on the streets.
I guess, is there concern from your standpoint that it's only going to get worse? I mean, if you've got this much of an issue now and nothing happens...
What's it going to be like 6 months from now?
Correct, or next fiscal year.
It has potential. This is why we need to act quickly. And fortunately, the House leadership has communicated to us that they are really willing, and they think what the governor's doing is not enough, because she declared an emergency on this issue.
Right.
And so when you declare an emergency, you're supposed to get certain things in place. Certain things happen. The House's perspective is that the governor hasn't done enough of the things to get the emergency declaration solidified as far as what happens after the declaration.
Because I would assume that your office gets called
on
this issue.
We get calls.
Shelter, where can we put these folks?
All the time. And I get calls from people who have been kicked out of their house because their rent was raised. So placing people, affordable housing, whether it be citizens or migrants, shelters versus affordable housing, it's a huge, robust issue. And you're right to think that it could get worse, and it likely will if we don't do something. Do
more resources need to be adjusted for, and I don't know specifically what department in the state handles, I think it must be a few that handle sort of this issue, but do you need more, for lack of a better word, foot soldiers to sort of help this? Because the processing, the paperwork and all that, it must take forever with
I mean, we need to streamline the process, and we need space. All of which we did during COVID for testing and medical treatment, if you remember. Do we have to do something like that for housing? Potentially. But again, the priority is to keep people off the streets and not to have any economic disruption from all these families coming in. Because the more money we put to that, the less money we put to X, Y, and Z. So it's a developing issue. It looks like it's getting worse, at least till January, early 2024. So we have enough gumption to act on this, and I think we should, and I believe that we will.
Another thing, and you've brought it up earlier, the gun reform legislation that just recently passed the House. The Senate is doing its own version of the bill. We don't know what's in that, at least right now. I would assume there's going to be at least some consensus. I know that a lot of things were talked about, but it really fell on partisan lines as well. Some people saying it was, I know the police chiefs are saying, no, the gun laws right now are fine, we just need to enforce them. I guess your
And one of
thoughts-
their big gripes, by the way, was that there was no cutout exception for off-duty officers with the time, manner, and place restrictions we put on polling places, government administration, and schools. And we changed that on the House floor.
And it said businesses, a business owner can, if somebody's carrying, it's their discretion if they want that, if they allow that person in or not.
Well, that's the case with anything, so long as you have a private. But so that was a piece in the original bill that you would need explicit permission to carry on commercial private property. I wasn't a proponent of that provision. Thank God it didn't make it in the final bill, because that just would have been a logistical nightmare to have, if you're going to the drive-through to get McDonald's and you have to get permission to do that if you have a gun on your person. I just think that was impractical. So we changed that. If you remember, Jim, the original bill was the impetus of this bill was the rise and issue of ghost guns and the Bruin decision. And so that prompted the legislature to act and get something as far as modernizing our gun laws with respect to ghost guns and other things. So the ghost gun piece, is, as many people know, it allows people to make guns at home. You either order the parts online, you get them in the mail, and you assemble it yourself, or if you have a 3D printer that makes, the hard plastic 3D printers, you can make guns that way. And so, according to this bill, if you're doing that, because right now it's legal, you could skirt every single gun law we have in the state, make your own gun, and that would be legal. The cops couldn't confiscate that gun if those pieces if they saw that. So right now, if you have pieces of a gun, the register and the receiver, not the barrel, because that was in the original bill, but if the registers and the receivers have to be serialized. So you have to serialize them yourself if you're making them or ordering those online.
Do you get that number from who?
And it's we have a serialization process. We have a database that you'd be able to go on and do it. It's pretty easy from what I hear. And so that's how we deal with ghost guns. Now, people are saying, the people who are making ghost guns are all criminals. They're not going to follow the law. Well, now, if they don't follow the law, there is no law. Okay, so that doesn't make sense. With this new law, if they don't follow the law, cops are going to be able to confiscate these pieces, these weapons, prior to anybody using them. So if you have a part of a gun, a register or a receiver that is, holds the main framework of a gun, and you have it in your car and you get pulled over now, the cop sees it, he can't do anything about it. He or she can't do anything about it. If this bill gets passed, the governor signs it as is, they will be able to, that will be a crime. If you have those gun parts that aren't serialized, we're not going to allow people to skirt gun laws. And ghost guns is the most efficient way for people to do that.
The assault weapons were also part of it too.
Assault weapons, correct.
Just to explain a little bit about that.
So we already have an assault weapons ban in place. It's not codified. It's more of a directive from the Attorney General. So we codified that in statutory language. It's pretty much the same parameters. If it's a semi-automatic weapon that's capable of receiving a feeder device, a magazine, then and it has at least two specific pieces to that gun, then it makes it an assault weapon. Type of grip, anything that makes it more accurate, flash guards, more discreet, types of like I said, grips that you can, to hold. It's a whole list of it. So we codified that, as well as a list of brand name assault weapons, AR-15s, AK-47s, Uzis, things like that. So those, the big issue in the original version of that bill is that people who have those things now will become criminals overnight, which would have been true. And so we amended that piece to include a grandfather clause that says anybody who has any of these prior to this law coming into effect is grandfathered in. That was a compromise. A lot of people didn't like to give that compromise, because it doesn't take guns off the street. Right. But just like with anything, you got to come to a compromise, and I think that was a fair give and take for that issue.
What about the argument, though, with the guns for schools or polling places or government buildings or what have you? The argument is there's violence happening there. Why can't people protect themselves when there has been increased violence in those places.
We've always had government restrictions on guns in those places to begin with.
Right.
So, and the idea is it's already being protected by police, and it's already.
But schools aren't necessarily, though.
Well, nowadays they are. You could make the argument that we don't have enough, but it's sensitive places, time, manner, and place restrictions are deemed constitutional by the conservative court that we already have to this day. Mm-hmm. The Bruin decision that came out explicitly said that. So the roadmap that we had for this bill was basically all the dicta, which is the non-binding language in the court decision from Bruin, and put it in place statutorily here in the Commonwealth. That's the goal. So in specifically, they said it's lawful and constitutional to regulate sensitive places, schools, polling places, government buildings. So we're just going basically on what the conservative Supreme Court has said, what we can do.
Got about a minute left, but lots of things that we could still talk about. One of the things we touched on that you had mentioned, state peer. Just give an update. The state peer, the RFPs are going out.
RFPs are going out. The process is starting over again. As you know, that legislation, which is before I got there, I think was 16, calls for retail, 20% retail up front, and in the back, all the rest commercial with the C Street, the ferry, and the refrigeration process. So that's going back out to bid. The general plan of the pair hasn't changed, just the process. And so we're excited to get that out to bid again and have people really develop that area. That's going to be the focal point of the city.
Well, as you said, coming in, you said it's amazing going by the waterfront and seeing just visually.
On Route 18, because you could always see the activity at the Mass CEC site on the southern port. Yeah. You could always see it from certain areas, but now you can see it at the top of Route 18 going south. At the northern part of Route 18, driving south, you can really see it, and it's amazing. Those cranes are the most sophisticated, biggest cranes. It requires special training, actually, which is what the ILA union was able to fight for. So they're going to be able to use those cranes. It's just an amazing site. It's a good visual representation of us as a Commonwealth moving forward.
In the city, I mean, when you think about it, your district is just at the hub of what's going on.
And that's that's a testament to the city. The mayor and the city have been great at making sure that our port infrastructure is up to date, that we're ready, willing, and able to handle all this activity on the port. So there are a lot of people to pat on the back, but to see it come into fruition is really awesome.
It's good seeing you as always, my friend.
Likewise.
All right. That's going to do it for this edition of the Beacon Hill Reports. I'm Jim Marshall, the New Bedford Cable Network. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Over 90.
180 over 111.
160 over 110. I had a stroke.
This is what high blood pressure looks like. You might not feel its symptoms, but the results from a stroke are far from invisible or silent. If you've come off your treatment plan, get back on it, or talk with your doctor to create an exercise, diet, and medication plan that works for you. Go to loweryourhbp.org.
If I would have followed a treatment plan, I would not be in this situation.